The Firekeeper's Bride, Part 9. A line almost crossed. Kael had always been careful. Careful with his words. Careful with his emotions. Careful not to get too close. But since the trial, something between them had shifted. Seraphina felt it in the way he watched her when he thought she wouldn't notice. In the way his body tensed whenever someone else spoke her name. In the way he hesitated whenever she was near, like a man standing at the edge of a fire. And for the first time, he was tempted to step in. The storm came suddenly. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, lightning flashing over the mountains. The wind howled through the keep, rattling windows and sending servants running to secure the gates. That evening, a messenger arrived. A noble from the capital. A man Seraphina had never met before. His name was Lord Dorian Vale. The moment he entered the great hall, Kael's entire body tensed. "I bring news from King Edric," Dorian announced, bowing. His eyes flickered to Seraphina. "And a request." Seraphina's stomach twisted. "What request?" Kael's voice was dangerously low. Dorian smiled. "The king believes Lady Seraphina should return to court for a time. He suggests she spend a season in the capital. 2. Reconnect with her noble roots." Silence. The fire in the hearth flared violently. Seraphina glanced at Kael. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't a request. It was a command, a way to separate them. To remind them that Seraphina still belonged to the king's world, not Kael's. Seraphina lifted her chin. "And if I refuse?" Dorian's gaze sharpened. "Then I fear you may lose the favor of the crown." Kael stepped forward. He did not touch her. He did not speak, but the heat of him was suddenly all around her. Seraphina's heart pounded. Then, finally, Kael turned to the nobleman. "She stays." Dorian arched a brow. "The decision is hers." Kael's golden eyes burned. "No, it isn't." Seraphina blinked. "Kael," he turned to her, and something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't about control. This was about keeping her safe. She swallowed hard. Then, with steady resolve, she turned to Dorian. "I will not go." Dorian's polite mask slipped. His gaze flickered between them, something calculating in his eyes. Then, with a slow nod, he said, "Very well." But as he left, Seraphina couldn't shake the feeling that the king's game had only just begun. That night, the storm grew worse. The winds howled, rain slamming against the stone walls of the keep. His gaze flickered toward the window, where the shutters shook violently. Finally, he sighed. "Your chamber is too close to the western towers. The storm is worse on this side." Seraphina frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Kael's jaw tensed. "You'll stay in my chambers tonight." The words hung in the air between them. Seraphina's breath caught. It wasn't the first time they had shared space. They had trained together, eaten together, stood side by side in front of the king. But this was different. This was choosing to be close. She should have said no, should have told him she was fine. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped forward. "Lead the way, Firekeeper." Kael's chambers were larger than hers, but sparsely decorated. A large hearth burned low in the corner, casting golden light across the stone walls. A single desk sat near the window, papers stacked neatly beside a dagger. And in the center of the room, one bed. Seraphina hesitated. Kael must have seen the look on her face because he exhaled. "I'll take the chair." She frowned. "You can't sleep in a chair all night." Kael gave her a dry look. "You assume I sleep at all." Seraphina sighed, stepping closer to the fire. The air between them felt different now. Not tense, not hostile, but something far more dangerous. Unspoken words, unanswered questions, something building. She turned to him. Kael was watching her again. The firelight flickered over his sharp features, his golden eyes burning in the dim light. Neither of them spoke. The storm raged outside, the wind howling. Seraphina took a breath. Kael, a sudden crack of thunder made the keep tremble. Without thinking, she reached for him. Kael caught her wrists, steadying her. His hands were warm, always warm. Seraphina's pulse pounded. He didn't let go, and for the first time, Neither did she. They were close now, too close. The fire between them was no longer just in the hearth. Kael's gaze dropped to her lips. Seraphina's breath caught. The space between them disappeared. A single moment, a single breath, and then Kael let go. The warmth vanished as he stepped back, clenching his jaw. "This is dangerous," he muttered. Seraphina swallowed hard, her pulse racing. "I know." Kael turned away, running a hand through his hair. "We can't." His voice was low, rough. Seraphina's chest tightened. She lifted her chin. "Because you don't want to?" Kael exhaled sharply. Then softly, "Because I do." Silence. The fire crackled between them. The storm raged on. Seraphina looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she knew this was not just an arranged marriage, not just a political game. It was the start of something inevitable, something they could no longer ignore, but neither was ready to admit it. Not yet. So, without another word, she turned toward the bed. Kael sat in the chair by the fire, and though neither of them spoke again, neither of them slept that night, because the fire between them was already burning, and soon, it would consume them both. To be continued. What happens next?